I'm going to give you the #1 best genre to work in as an indie filmmaker, personally, I feel.
Better be horror, better be horror.
It's not horror.
Dude, I'm gonna fight you.
Thumbnails just friggin' Zack punching me straight in the nose.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. I am your host, Zachary Koch.
And I'm your co-host, Matteo Guthrie.
And this is the Your Next Film podcast that's designed to empower young creatives to excel at their craft and to really push themselves creatively and artistically.
For artists, by artists. This week, we are talking about genres. Specifically, what genres are the best for indie filmmakers?
And just the best, period.
Yeah, the best, period.
Yeah. At the expense
more
of
detective
others.
movies. Bam, that's it.
Yeah,
Don't do any...
That's why that's all we
Freaking
make.
dramedies? Who cares? Nor detective movies.
Rom-coms? Get them out of here.
I'm actually personally a huge rom-com defender.
Yeah,
like
that's
I'm
true.
pretentious
You
in
do have
all
some-
things, but rom-coms, there's something about them.
Yeah.
Fall Guy recently, really good.
I still need to see that.
And literally like 5 years ago, I was like, man, I should write an action rom-com. And then I didn't. And then the Fall Guy came out and I'm like, do I even need to do that anymore?
Dude,
It just
that's
does
been
it so
happening to me a
well.
lot lately,
Yeah.
where I'll have like this idea and then someone will like kind of beat me to it and do it better. And I'm like, oh, well, yeah.
I mean, just pivot, you know?
That is true. Yeah.
But-
there's room for 2 action rom-coms, frankly.
Frankly, there should be more action rom-coms. Fall Guy freaking nailed it. When we talk about making films, there are some genres that are just harder to make as filmmakers. And this is where I'm going to turn around and to you, the audience, say, don't let whatever budget, whatever experience you have stop you from making a film in a specific genre.
Correct.
Because you, as an indie filmmaker, can make a film in any genre you want, frankly. Tailor the story to what you're able to actually put on screen. But that doesn't mean that you can't do a war film as somebody that barely has, enough money for props, much less, rolling a tank down the street or whatever.
Yeah. Do a film about a guy that lands.
Yeah, a paratrooper stuck in a tree.
Exactly.
You can do so much and it'll be just fine and you'll do a good job. But when it does come to those, some genres require more production value than others. A lot of sci-fi, for example, if you're doing something about spaceships, it's you better get ready to like put together miniatures and like get like a whole setup for compositing them in.
This is another reason why I'm excited for Adobe's Firefly AI. No, but
Ad
like,
read.
actually though, I mean, I think as time goes on, you could, my dream is a future where filmmakers can kind of just make whatever they want. They can go from concept to screen much easier. Obviously don't have a completely AI generated film. That would be boring as hell. But as things stand, you're right that some genres are a lot harder than others.
But now you can make serious production value
On your MacBook.
Yeah, on your MacBook, which is insane to say, even frankly, like 5 years ago. It was
We were there.
we were there, but it was people weren't doing it to the extent they are today.
Correct.
There's
Like, they
some
weren't
really
shooting
impressive stuff
raw
coming out now.
video
Yeah.
and editing that on the go.
But like in 2019, like I remember like hearing about that, and I was like, whoa, that's like crazy.
Yeah, I mean, around that time, like you would have been looking for an iMac Pro, which they only made one generation of that, and they should have kept going because the iMac Pro is really cool. But that was 2017, and that was still kind of the standard if you were trying to do stuff like this, edit raw video, for example. And that started at like $6,000. We complain about the cost of the Mac Studio, but it's kind of silly to complain about it because it's so cheap comparatively.
Yeah, like for the processing power you get.
That's what I'm saying. Nuts.
But
some of those constraints are being
those
lifted.
constraints as AI happens and as just
Processing power, neural
processing
engines,
power,
all that
just
stuff.
Even just like workflows and tools you are provided, it's becoming easier to do that for the here and now, which is when we're making films, because hopefully 5 years from now we will be in a very different place and we won't just be
You still have to think about costuming and buying 3D models and
just freaking just AI those in.
I'm saying as of today,
yeah.
Like a drama doesn't require a whole lot of props, so just even on just that very simple level, some genres are more complicated than others to pull off. And so
a bit of a cheat code. I'm going to give you the #1 best genre to work in as an indie filmmaker, personally, I feel.
better be horror.
It's not horror.
Dude,
Comedy.
I'm gonna fight you. Comedy is the hardest one.
There's thumbnails just friggin' Zack punching me straight in the nose. No, listen to me. Comedy, really hard to do. Not a lot of indie filmmakers are doing comedy. It is not a saturated genre.
So that's a different argument than
yes, but hold up. You can basically set a comedy however you want. You can have a one-man comedy. You could have a no-man comedy sometimes.
So it's hard to pull off from a writing perspective.
It is hard to pull off from a writing perspective.
But from a production value perspective, it's easy.
And frankly, not to toot my horn, some of the easiest things for me to write are just kind of funny comedy things versus like, oh, I have to really like put in like really solid effort to make this dramatic scene not seem corny.
Yeah.
Like really leaning into like the ridiculousness.
I see what you're saying. And like also, you know, like my hero at the moment is like Joel Haver. Yeah. 100%.
Oh gosh, yeah.
My goal is to in 1 year's time have him on this podcast. I don't think I told you that.
No,
that's my goal, dude. It's going to be great.
Is there enough room on the couch?
We could snuggle up. He's kind of built his career off of making comedy feature films. And so I kind of concede a little bit on that point. I will say that comedy is as hard from a production value perspective, or as easy rather, as like a drama, or, you know, you really, I do see what you're saying though, that it can be simple.
As long as you write it to be done, which obviously means like you have to have talent that like can pull it off. Cause like not all talent can pull off comedy. So action people can pull off, like, you know, if you're
a martial artist,
if you're a martial artist, they can pull it off. But again, that's really hard to pull off.
It's also very hard to pull off being funny.
I've had good success, I'll say. There's been some with talent that is like perfectly serviceable. I wouldn't call them like, you know, Jim Carrey level like comedians or you know.
I also don't think we've really leaned into the comedy on any particular film.
You and I haven't. In college, I leaned into that a little more. I wrote some things that were very comedy focused and were really easy to do on a college student's. I have like a week notice to do this entire assignment. It was much easier for me to just do a comedy, write something funny and send it out than even a drama. Because with dramas,
drama is hard.
Drama is tough, but drama is also probably the second.
Okay. So when we're talking about like difficulty, you know, what genre should we, you know, push you to do? Chances are you don't really need two people telling you that, because you're going to just make the film that you want.
Make the art you want to make.
You either, that's like telling me to make like acoustic music. It's like, no,
you should make acoustic music though.
Yeah, but like I'm doing the cool dancey like synthwave music, and that's really fun. And that's just the genre I'm working in, you know, musically.
All right, next film, acoustic soundtrack. Deal with it.
I will accept. I will try.
Actually, I think the next film needs like actually like techno in it.
Perfect. Dude, can I score it? That'd be fun.
Yeah, score it. Please do.
Go see our last episode about that. But yeah, no. So when we're talking about difficulty, on one hand, it's like difficulty from like a talent perspective, because like it's hard to be funny. You also have to be a good director to tell a compelling drama, you know, which deals with like interpersonal conflict, and there's all this like nuances to the direction that you give the actors and stuff. So dramas are hard as well.
Yeah.
But I see what you're saying, that it's, even though it's hard in those ways, it's easier from a production value perspective. And I also see a possible rebuttal to that, where horror films do require like specific costuming and masks and blood and gore and all that stuff. It doesn't require them, but you know, it does lend itself to those elements more than a drama lends itself to any particular element.
You know, I'm gonna actually kind of disagree with you on what you're saying about comedy being hard, because like that's hard, like, you know, being funny is hard or whatever. But you as a director, you as a writer, you like it's up to you. You know.
Okay, but from a content perspective, I would still say that it's harder than a horror. Like it's pretty easy to write a good horror film.
Yeah, at least for me as a writer, all I'm saying is like, oh, it's not funny. Well, I just need to work harder. It's not it's not scary. Well, let me just see if I can get a loan for 10 grand from like my nearest grandparent.
I would disagree with that completely. I think making something scary absolutely comes down to your skill.
Like, but like there are points where like I just need to be a better writer if it's not funny.
Yeah.
Or, you know, I need to write around my talent. That's the difficulty in comedy for me is finding talent that can deliver it properly.
Gotcha.
It's such a desaturated genre comparatively, again, because like there's plenty of people writing great indie comedy stuff.
Right.
But it's rather desaturated compared to horror or drama that in the indie space.
So we're going into a few different. Like,
I'm going into a few different things, but Like if it's not funny, that's up to me as the writer to make it funny.
Gotcha.
Which I can do by sitting at my computer and writing rather than I need to buy a prop gun somewhere. How can I find this cheap? I need to get permits for, whatever. I need to get like all period clothing because I've written a World War I trench film.
For sure. Yeah. And I see what you're saying. So you're kind of advising our audience, you're kind of pushing them towards genres that require less production value, which I get that. I would say that horror is, for me at least, like very easy to do.
It's very high up on my list.
So Spencer and I, me and him, you know who Spencer is, right?
Yeah, we all know Spencer here.
So my buddy Spencer, we used to make a lot of films together, and this was definitely earlier on in my career because we were neighbors and we would just do it for fun and stuff, and we ended up sticking with it for a good while. And then at some point, like as far as my main collaborator goes, it went from him to you kind of around the same time.
I'm the usurper here.
Yeah. But we had this conversation multiple times in the past, and we kind of both agreed that horror was a bit easier. So 2 against 1. I'm just kidding.
Okay. Well,
and it's funny because we would always position it as horror's easy, comedy's hard. That's kind of what we had come down with,
I completely disagree.
No, and I understand why you disagree. For a horror film, why I actually do recommend most filmmakers that are starting out start with horror is because it's so easy to get like a grasp on. Because if you think about it, a horror film is supposed to have a certain tone. It's supposed to be scary. It's supposed to be suspenseful.
And genre conventions.
It's very easy to imagine, what is this movie supposed to feel like? Going into this particular scene, what is my goal with it? It's like, well, it's to be suspenseful. It's to be scary. And so because it's a horror film, because it's supposed to be scary, you're leading into every scene with that and designing the elements around the film to kind of mesh with that goal, right? And so it was always easy for me to like wrap my head around. With comedy, you could argue that it's the same thing, just like make it funny. But as any good comedy writer will tell you, like writing for the punchline isn't really what you want to do either. No. So writing things to be funnier is kind of bad advice sometimes. It has to be funny, but in line with the story and stuff. And so when you're doing a comedy, is you're left with, I have to tell a compelling story and I have to really think hard about what the most important aspects of every scene are. Like you would with, you have to think about that with every type of story, but it's a little bit more complicated than just make it scary, make it scary, make it scary.
This is where I show my writer's privilege because I'm like, so what? That's the easy part.
Yeah.
Like filming it is the hard part for me.
Well, for me, I've written things in the past and like, at different times would have considered myself a writer, but for film specifically, I would struggle with that sort of thing because I was in it for the visuals, I was in it for the acting, I was in it for the elements that make up a film that weren't the script. And it was always hard for me in the past to not just enter a scene and be a little bit aimless, right? I did a historical drama, which was among the hardest genres to pull off.
Impressive
in some sense.
Well, at the age of
16.
Yeah, 16, making a historical drama that kind of looked pretty...
It kind of worked.
Yeah, it kind of...
But the writing was awful.
Because you were 16.
I think what you would have written at 16 would have been better than what I was writing at 16.
I'm a genetic freak, though. Don't talk about me.
Fair enough. But my point is, like, I look at those scenes, like, I didn't know what I was doing with these scenes. Brothers Bunker is the film we're talking about. Every single scene felt so aimless. And it's because I didn't know what the purpose of the scene was. And with time, you figure that out. Like you go into a scene, you're like, this is the purpose of the scene, etc. And this is how it plays into the other scenes. No problem. Easy. I feel like that's a lot easier for me now. That would be a lot easier for me now. But horror, it's a lot simpler to wrap your mind around. It's just like, make it tense, make it scary, build suspense, have a payoff of some kind.
No, I agree with you. And horror is actually pretty high up on my list of great films for indie filmmakers to get into. It's not at the top because it is really saturated. If you're an indie filmmaker...
Yeah, that's kind of the third pillar here.
Yeah, it's so saturated because everybody's making them. I know several different generations, different parts of the country, filmmakers, and they're all doing indie horror. Now, I will say that when people go watch horror movies, especially indie horror, they're much more forgiving. Oh, this looks bad. Oh, this is campy. Oh, this isn't scary at all. But they're much more forgiving because there's so much out there. They're used to not only horror as a genre, but indie horror as a genre. And that is something that will benefit you as a indie filmmaker is you won't get You know, if the comedy isn't funny, they will be like, this isn't funny. If a horror movie isn't scary, some
Right.
people will still enjoy it, even though if it's.
But that's just another reason why you should do horror instead of these other things.
Again, market saturation is frankly way too much for me.
Yeah, but there's also like a market there for it.
Yeah, there's
like,
a market.
I would say that the demand outpaces the supply for horror films. Horror like fans love horror. They're more dedicated to the art that is the horror film than like your average comedy fan who's just kind of in it.
I do agree with that. I just feel that often, like, there's just so much being pushed their way that you will get lost in the white noise.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's
fair
also
enough.
a backlog.
I do basically agree with all of your points. So I have different priorities when it comes to giving advice. And so for me, it'd be like, you should make horror because it's easier to have passable film when you work with horror. Because for one, the audience is more forgiving, which is what you were just saying. For two, it's easier to know what your goal is every time you go into a scene. You know, it's very easy to establish this cycle of setups and payoffs with horror. The point of the film is very straightforward. You know, will the monster get them or not? You know, and you don't even have to show it. So those are the reasons why I would give for doing horror. But I would agree with you that the production value is definitely slightly higher. It doesn't have to be high, but horror requires slightly more production value than a comedy.
Yeah,
for sure. You can definitely strip down a comedy more than you can strip down a horror film. So I would agree with that. And I agree that the market saturation aspect, you know, maybe if you want to stand out more, doing comedy would be a little bit easier than horror. But I would also argue comedy's pretty saturated as well.
But if you're making like a feature, like indie comedy features are much rarer than indie horror features.
I would agree.
And I'm using indie as a catch-all term here. Tied with horror for pretty easy, to me, is drama. As long as you can find,
Dude, for me,
as long as you can find decent talent,
that's hard. That's hard. Like, it's easy to act in a horror film, easier.
just walk by NYU, and there's like at least 8 different ones.
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm not really walking down that way very often.
I walk by enough college drama.
Yeah, that's
areas.
Fair. That is fair. But like, talent is very hard to find. Like, that's among the hardest things to nail when it comes to putting together a film project, and you're requiring more from talent that you might not even have in the first place. Okay, so other genres, how would you rank them?
I would rank above both horror and drama is like crime drama.
Matteo, you're killing me, dude. Crime drama is harder than regular drama.
If you do something like Nolan's The Following...
You're saying crime drama is easier than regular drama from like a production standpoint?
If you do something like Nolan's... Is it Following?
Yeah, Following.
His first film? Nolan's Following is extremely low budget. It's such a constrained film, and yet it's such an effective crime film because people will watch it for the crime aspect, and you can make it as low stakes as you need to. Colleagues was a crime drama.
Sure. I would still say Colleagues would be harder than a regular drama because you're adding those elements to drama. So it has to be harder to do.
For me, the crime aspect and the kind of the pulpier aspect is it takes away from the need for performance.
Oh, interesting.
Because there's more focus on the events than just straight up just people like emoting at each other.
Okay. I mean, that's an interesting angle. It's almost like we have to have multiple lists for each kind of like
there's different aspects, but weighing all the aspects together, it's comedy and like crime drama, like that sort of like crime/noir film, because you can do a lot with very little for those genres.
Man, but like I do see what you're saying with like a regular drama and the comedy. Horror just seems like it'd be easier than
horror is very easy, but
than crime drama though.
The saturation, there's much more saturation.
I don't even know if that should be a factor.
It's a factor to me.
Well, it's a factor, but not in like what's the easiest thing to. Okay, so you're thinking from like market success.
Yeah, I'm talking to you as an indie filmmaker. You should be making these instead of a horror film because everybody's making a horror film.
So I would almost
why not do something to challenge yourself artistically?
Okay, that's a whole nother angle.
This is what you should be making, and they're good genres.
And this is why I'm making an acoustic soundtrack, right? There is that. I do see what you're saying.
Like sci-fi, way down below. You can make.
I would agree with that.
You can make a very low budget, like, you know, again, following style like sci-fi film, like Her, right? Which Her you could do today outside.
I mean, you consider Does God Love Robots a sci-fi film?
Yeah, I consider Does God Love Robots a sci-fi film. Now, that had production value. We put a cardboard box on my head for that one.
Yeah. Which is kind of why this discussion kind of doesn't matter, because
Yeah.
you really can lower.
Again, yeah, you can do it at all levels. And
You can really
at that point,
strip
I would
it.
say just make a comedy, because fewer people are doing that.
But you kind of shot yourself in the foot a little bit, because if we're taking the production value element out of it by saying we can reduce any genre to like the bare minimum, to the point where a sci-fi film is as difficult as a horror, you know, because
Then comedy's up there, because
you would still say comedy is easier than a film like Does God Love Robots, where you literally put a cardboard box on your head and wandered around your house. Comedy's easier.
I'm 100% going to stick to my guns on that one.
But I don't think you're right.
Comedy was easier for me to write than Does God Love Robots.
Okay, well, fair enough.
Not.
I'm still viewing this. I'm still projecting here. I'm still saying, because Does God Love Robots for me would have been a lot easier to write than a comedy. Like, absolutely. But
Does God Love Robots also had technically more market saturation.
So give me your rapid fire indie filmmaking market saturation by genre.
Okay, I would say comedy's at the bottom.
Least saturated.
One of the least saturated.
Okay.
Romance is also I would say romance is even below.
Okay, fair enough.
There are a lot of like indie like romances that are like more dramas, but like just like straight romance.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have, and again, these are generalizations, sci-fi is pretty low as well.
Yeah.
A lot of people will make sci-fi things, but a lot of them aren't good.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them are like too amateur to actually like count in this case. Like, so they get rejected from festivals, so I don't see them.
Okay, so I was going to say, I'm viewing this from the perspective of like a festival block.
But that gets bumped up above comedy, because there are so many really good fan films. Mm-hmm. Like really impressive fan films.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so then you would say horror, and then drama, then
action is somewhere in there. I would say action. There's been a big burst since like Devin Supertramp started doing his stuff of like low budget action stuff that's pretty good, because like a bunch of like people that did parkour, a lot of people that like, oh yeah, I'm a stunt performer, let me do like indie stuff where I can be the star. Action is not as well done in the indie space, but also it's so hard to do from a production standpoint that I wouldn't like suggest it. Then comes put drama even below horror, because there's a lot of mumblecore, but that depends.
Okay.
Like I've seen a lot of mumblecore, but I've seen a lot of horror, and then horror is probably like the top of the market saturation.
Okay,
in my opinion.
So for me personally, as far as saturation goes, I think they're all pretty equally saturated.
Comedy as much as horror? No. Do you know how much horror gets pumped out by sophomores in college? Because I was a sophomore in college, and it was just...
But there was a lot of people that just wanted to make silly, goofy, fun films. And I saw a lot of comedies too. So like for me, I'm kind of viewing this from the perspective of like your average film festival block that's going for... Granted, they're going for variety, but it is representative of the proportions of like which genres are being made. I see a tiny bit of sci-fi, probably maybe a little less than other things. I do.
You see more sci-fi than action.
No, a little less. But for the most part, it's like pretty even. Like I see a good amount of horror. I see a good amount of like crime. Crime thriller is like the student film genre. I will fight you on that.
I believe you on that.
But it's just. But all that to like, my perspective is like it's a lot flatter than maybe what you're suggesting as far as like saturation distribution, which is why I feel like that shouldn't be a factor as much when we're giving people advice. It's like teaching someone to play music and saying we're not going to teach whatever that chord progression is that's like in every pop song. We're not going to teach you that. You shouldn't start with the basics in that way, because so many pop songs already have that. You should
we're not talking to people starting. We're talking to people in the middle of their journey. And I'm like,
in which case they've already developed taste and already have like taste. Their genres.
But I'm just saying,
out.
Like, you should do comedy, because like I know plenty of people that are like really solid horror directors that I'm like, maybe you should not do a horror film this time. Maybe you should do a comedy. Because there just aren't as many good comedies. I see a lot of like...
That's why you would give the advice, just because there's not as many of them?
But
what if they're really good at horror and that's what they prefer to make?
I mean, yeah, but then you need to branch out artistically.
Okay, all right. Listen, I do agree with you there. I do agree with everything you're saying. As far as like, there's like pros and cons to like the different genre. I think a more fun format, right, for this, for the like second half of this discussion, the pros and cons of each genre.
Okay.
So, because for me, I'm not as I am getting significantly better at writing because I've been investing a lot of time recently into that.
I haven't. I just freaking
I know.
procrastinate until 1 a.m.
But to someone who isn't as savvy at writing, but maybe they're really good at cinematography, the discussion changes a lot.
Oh, yeah,
because
massively.
a comedy goes from being easy for you to being like one of the most difficult things for them. So it really just comes down to like the person. So for me and Spencer's sweet spot growing up was horror. The horror was the sweet spot.
Yeah,
it was the easiest thing for us.
I broke you.
But that was the easiest thing for us. So starting with action. What are the pros and cons, Matteo, of doing an action film? What makes it easier to do than the other things, and what makes it harder to do than the other things?
So action, just like comedy, is if you can do it well, you're doing it better than most of the people out there. There's a local Oklahoman. I worked with his uncle doing AV installation. That's how I know him. But he worked on like Reservoir Dogs. He was actually like really involved with that. He's really talented. I've just seen his stuff. But his whole shtick is like he's really good at action, or at least starting out it was. He's obviously working on Reservoir Dogs, so he's better at stuff than just action. But he and his kind of group, they were making some really solid native-focused action films. And if you can get a really solid cast that can, they can do the punches and the martial arts and stuff, you are operating at least above 60 to 70% of everybody else making that sort of action.
So you're saying it's action's good for standing out.
If you can do it right, like you'll really stand out.
Okay, so rapid fire. Let's go real quick.
So cons, really hard to do.
Yeah, physically taxing, physically demanding.
Taxing. You have to have like getting a cast for just any film is tough enough. Especially
but getting a cast that's willing to get punched,
a cast
possibly,
and is good at getting punched. And can deliver performances as well as
while also getting punched. Yeah,
liability on set. That's a huge thing, right?
Which kind of coincides with production value.
Yeah,
too.
if you notice, we don't have any pyrotechnics on our sets because nobody wants to burn somebody's house down. Nobody wants to accidentally get.
Our audience was wondering why we don't have more pyrotechnics.
Sorry, we're gonna come out and say this. Sorry, we don't have any pyrotechnics for a reason.
No.
Like
we lost all of our subscribers.
We could buy fireworks, but that's not a safe. Not a professional way to handle a set. Sci-fi, again, it's a scalable genre, but it's really tough to do engaging sci-fi when people are expecting sci-fi. So if you can do it well, again, I don't know if you'll stand out as much as action, but it's definitely something you should be lauded for, but not everybody can do it well, and it is tough to do engaging sci-fi.
I had an easy time with sci-fi because my ideas were always very conceptual. It wasn't taking place in a normal world. It was a world with different rules, and I liked setting up those new rules. And
this God Love Robots was great because I was like, oh yeah, I can do a robot without a soul, or does he have a soul? That's like a time-honored like sci-fi trope.
But also,
it was tough like writing like the character work for it because I was like, what am I trying to say with this?
Yeah, for sure.
But like that part of sci-fi is easy. The writing is very easy, I would say, and also getting people to pay attention. People love sci-fi. Sci-fi's been going forever. And to my knowledge, there hasn't been a time when people are like, I just don't really care about sci-fi anymore. The way people don't care about Westerns anymore.
I feel like sci-fi is not that popular though.
Really?
In the mainstream?
Maybe I'm just a freak. I don't know.
No, dude, sci-fi is my favorite genre. But every time I talk about sci-fi, there's always someone in the room that's like, I hate sci-fi.
You can craft a sci-fi film that people will like.
Right.
And there's an audience for it.
Fair.
At the same time, if you're doing, tenet of sci-fi has to be in space a lot of the times, production value, you have to really like lean into miniatures or figure out AI generation or figure out matte painting,
3D
CG
compositing.
Work. Yeah.
Or put a cardboard box on your head and call it a day. Put a cardboard
box on your head. Again, there's levels to it, but often like people are like, oh, I want a sci-fi, and they don't just want something that looks like normal life, except it's supposed to be the future. Obviously Her pulled it off by basically, is Siri on my phone?
Yeah, so I feel like
I'm going to process my divorce through it. But like sci-fi is like, in general, most people are not going to be writing Her. They're going to be writing the Terminator.
That is true. And I feel like
Terminator's doable sci-fi.
Doable sci-fi.
Yeah.
I would say Her is doable sci-fi.
The Matrix, technically doable sci-fi.
But
You'd have to scale it down.
I would say not agree with Terminator. Why would you say Terminator?
Just have a guy that looks scary like Arnold, and then just fake robot arm.
Oh, okay.
It's so easy.
You're right. I was thinking of like the exoskeleton part, like the very iconic.
You can make a
the robots
pretty convincing
in the miniature
robot arm and just stuff it in his leather jacket sleeve.
Yes, but as far as I gotcha. Yeah.
And again, like obviously you have to write towards your strengths, but sci-fi is doable. On the other hand, there are parts that aren't, you know, so
time travel's doable.
Yeah,
time
travel's a big one because it's pretty easy to do. Period.
You just talk about it.
Yeah.
Oh, you mean like
I mean you can do like to the 60s.
I was thinking more like Looper.
Ooh, Looper's good.
Looper is hard for other reasons, but as far as like the sci-fi aspect
you could do Looper pretty easily the same way you could do like a crime drama pretty easily.
I agree.
So speaking of crime drama, so the pros are that it's really, really easy. You know, it's freaking...
It's easy.
The pros are that it's really, really easy from like, oh, we're bank robbers and we're hiding out and now we're going to like talk at each other.
Yeah.
Right. Or like, I'm going to like do like a detective drama where it's just kind of, he's like walking and interviewing people. It's really easy from that aspect. You can take it a bunch of different directions and people will generally tune in for all of those. On the other hand, if like prop guns are an issue, that's an issue. If you're trying
you don't have to include them.
If you make it like, obviously it's what you include in it, but you also have to make the stakes hit a certain point because it is a crime film and there are genre requirements.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of cons for it for me. It's mainly make the threat believable and make people like want to watch it.
So maybe like it might be difficult to
There's a reason like Bleeding Heart Routine was like partially a crime drama because that was really easy to pull off and we pulled it off and we pulled it off well, I feel.
Yeah, I feel like we did too. I mean, it was nominated for quite a few awards and that was cool.
Technically Choose a Wagon was also a crime drama.
Dude, our films are kind of weird to classify.
Yeah,
I'm not gonna lie.
It was also kind of a comedy. So like, but to that drama, the pros are like people will show up for an indie drama.
It is heavy on the writing.
It's very heavy on the writing, very heavy on the performance.
Which
those are the two cons.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't find heavy on the writing to be a con, but also guess what I get paid to do. So
yeah, for sure.
But that does do a lot of heavy lifting. On the like production standpoint, it's your writing does all the heavy lifting. If you're doing Mumblecore style, like the performances don't even do a lot of the heavy lifting, so it's all on the writing as long as you can make it engaging.
You don't have to be like a Stanley Kubrick to shoot it either. It doesn't have to be flashy.
You can have people in the car just having a fight while on a road trip. That's like a staple of indie drama because most people have cars and they can just go on a road trip and that's built in locations. It's so easy compared to sci-fi, right? Where you're like, I have to matte paint a freaking city skyline that looks futuristic.
Yeah, but not a con if you're a painter.
Not a con if you're a painter. Con if you're a writer, I guess. Horror, so easy. Like people will show up for low budget horror. They will forgive your mistakes in low budget horror. Oh, that looks fake. It doesn't matter because this is indie horror and I'm here for that. Meanwhile, that looks fake in sci-fi. You can take somebody completely out of the narrative because they're like, trying to suspend their disbelief, and then your spaceship looks like it's out of Dune, freaking 1984.
Yeah.
Right. The cons, I mean, again, like you could say, oh, production value, but you can scale that down.
Well, you can for all of these.
Yeah, you can scale it, but like average production value, I will say horror is pretty low production for indie horror stuff.
Okay.
More blood, but that's fun. It's great to do. Your performances, the lady has to scream and like squirt blood out of like a pretend stab wound. It
can be campy.
Your guy can wear a mask so he does not have to, like your
definitely taken advantage of that.
And yeah, we've taken advantage of that. Comedy.
Same thing as drama, basically.
Doesn't have that
heavy on the writing.
Yeah, it's obviously heavy on the writing.
But
like comedy compared to horror doesn't like, if you do a good comedy, it's really good. If you do a good horror film,
you say that for all of them, basically all of them.
If you do a good horror film, like there's a lot of people do a lot of good indie horror. It's more saturated.
My final argument.
Okay. Closing statement.
Our first feature film is basically a horror film.
Yeah.
Because it was
100%.
the most doable one for us.
Yeah. I'm not saying that horror isn't doable. I'm just saying if I were to write our first...
Most doable genre. We picked a genre that would be the easiest. We planned every aspect of this film to be the easiest for our first feature.
A horror film was a challenge for me. I didn't want to do a comedy because I do comedies.
So you did it to challenge yourself?
Yeah, the script's challenging me right now.
Fair enough.
and the production value is challenging me. A comedy would be. I had a comedy that technically we just shot as our micro short. There's a longer plot for it that's funnier and better.
I was wondering that. I was like, does this mean we're not going to make this into something else?
I mean, we can probably reuse
I mean, we botched it
our
so
micro
badly. Like,
I think I could wrangle it into something poignant and funny.
then let's do it.
But I'm just saying, like, that comedy would have been so much easier to do than this one.
From like a writing perspective.
Yeah, from a writing perspective.
Interesting.
I'm challenging myself in making a doable horror film.
Good point. No, that was a good point. For me, I pushed us in this direction because I thought it'd be easier. But
well, you were wrong.
I was wrong on that. Yeah, no, I was wrong on that in that way because it is taking you a while to write it.
Yeah. Oh, I'm suffering. It's not even the writing process. It's just I'm just suffering.
It's gonna be good though.
Oh yeah, we'll do great. I'm afraid we're gonna jinx ourselves if we name it Somniac.
Why would we jinx ourselves?
First Somniac, admittedly bad. Second Somniac, the production
noticeable improvement.
The production on that was so heinous for the because I had a midterm the week after, and we spent 24 hours straight on it almost.
The first shoot day was 14 hours.
Yeah,
that's a long.
And then we had reshoots, and we did the work, but it was not fun.
Yes. I think we learned a lot from that project though, because
we learned so much.
Project
I learned don't do this again like this.
Yeah, but I mean, every other production since has been just a lot of fun and better,
obviously better. And we've done that by managing things. But at the time, I was I do not want to do this anymore.
Yeah, well, fair enough.
Grit our teeth and push through it. We cannot jinx this.
Somniac 3, baby.
Yeah. Well,
but that being said,
make a comedy.
Or a horror.
Or a horror film.
Or a crime drama. Make whatever the hell you want to make.
I guess my point is the best film for you, the best genre for your next film to be is whatever you think you can handle well and will push your art.
Yeah.
That may be a horror film because those are pretty easy to make. That might be a mumblecore drama. That might be an action film because you just have that skill set. I'm not you. I would suggest doing a comedy because those are not as saturated.
Mm-hmm.
Some of you might be like, oh yeah, I live in a different part of the country, or I just run in a different circle and everybody's doing comedies and I'm tired of a bunch of films about identical awkward men stumbling through life. Or, Francis Ha 2 again.
Yeah. Well, now that you've figured out what genre your next film's going to be in.
Comedy.
Or horror. The next step is figuring out where to get your music from. So go check out our last episode about scoring your own film. We think it's hugely beneficial.
Tune into that episode if you haven't seen it yet, and we provide a few helpful tips.
Yeah, specifically for making your own music, which is very fun. But, well, this has been energetic and fun
and combative.
Slightly. It's once a month we have
we have to.
Funny enough, our popular episode was me being stagnation doesn't exist and you're not.
I'm stagnation.
You're always improving.
It is what it is. We appreciate you tuning in, though.
Yeah, no, your viewership means a lot, and we hope to make lots more episodes like this.
We hope this was edifying and helpful.
I've
been Matteo Guthrie.
And I've been Zachary Koch. And this has been Your Next Film.
Go make a comedy movie!
Or a horror.